And hello, friends. We welcome you to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm your host, Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. We welcome back to our Chapters program today author Eric Douglas, who was last with us in 2016, and he's been up to all kinds of things, both writing and both with oral histories and recording and publishing all kinds of different type of material. We're going to be talking with him about that today, as well as what his great character Mike Scott has been up to. And Eric joins us. He is the author of 8 novels and 2 novellas in the Mike Scott thriller series. His most recent is titled Water Crisis, which we're going to talk about here today. He's also authored 4 children's stories collected in the book Sea Turtle Rescue and Other Stories. After completing a program at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University, he jumped into documentary work, creating nonfiction works on lobster divers, war veterans, and cancer survivors. He recently released the inspirational biography Dive Abled, the Leo Morales story through Best Publishing, and he and former DAN President Dan Orr co-authored the scuba diving reference book Scuba Diving Safety. Since 2009, he's written the Lessons for Life column also for Scuba Diving magazine. As a documentarian, Eric has worked in Russia, Honduras, and most recently in his home state of West Virginia, featuring oral histories of West Virginia war veterans in the documentary West Virginia Voices of War and the companion book Common Valor, and the Festival Oral History Project that led to Memories of the Valley, another documentary. He's also the associate producer for Inside Appalachia at West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Eric, welcome back to Chapters. It's good to see you again.
That was a long laundry list of stuff.
You've been up to everything.
As my wife refers to, my mini jobs.
Yes, that's your mini hats. Well, we're glad to have you back to talk about those mini hats.
Good to be here. I appreciate it.
We'll get to some of those other things you've been working on in just a minute, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about what your outstanding character Mike Scott has been up to since we last talked to you in 2016. He's found himself in all kinds of different sticky situations.
There's a friend of mine refers to it as, I'm not going anywhere with Mike Scott because wherever he goes, things explode around him. The most recent book you mentioned, there's been a couple books in the Mike Scott series since we last spoke. I don't think we had done, last time we talked, I don't think we did The Third Key yet. So we had The Third Key, and then Turks and Chaos, which was a fun title of a book, and then Water Crisis, the most recent one. He's been bouncing all over the world as usual, getting into trouble, and actually one of the fun things about The Third Key is it was really compressed into about a day and a half. It was all kinds of action and just nonstop. It's one of those he never got a chance to sleep. It just something kept blowing up in front of him, and he had to keep reacting. The Water Crisis is a little more cerebral. It's you've read it. There's all sorts of stories in it that are pitched, that are characterized as news stories. The thing is, they're all true. Mm-hmm. That was real research. There were real stories. Actually, the motivating thing, or the thing that got me started on Water Crisis, was the city of Cape Town, South Africa, was literally about to run out of water. A town of several million people was counting down until day 0, the day they would not have water for the inhabitants of the city. And I started looking into it, and there's places all over the world that are facing this kind of trouble. And then there's places all over the world where one of the causes for the civil war in Syria, for example, is lack of water, so people are moving to the cities, and then it causes unrest, that sort of thing. Iran's facing the same thing. So you're getting all these troubled spots around the world anyway that are running out of water, and it's just causing more trouble. Now, I spun off from there. Obviously, it's a work of fiction, and so we have a little fun with it. And then I had to get Mike Scott involved. But yeah, but there's a lot of truth behind that book, and I try to educate and entertain all at the same time. Mm-hmm. When they're, especially with ocean issues and water type issues, I try to maybe people will go away from it learning a little bit, even if they don't want to.
Yeah. And when I read your book, I was reminded about a class I took as an undergraduate at Marshall. This was a long time ago, but my professor studied water and the effects of water, and he talked about how the next big crisis that was going to cause war and conflict was a lack of fresh water. Yep. As population expands, as Unfortunately, third world populations continue to grow, that water is going to be a scarce resource. And he said it's going to lead to war, it's going to lead to famine, it's going to lead to countries going to military conflict with one another over accessibility to fresh water. And when I was reading your story, it reminded me of that, and I thought that was so interesting and topical. But also, you kind of talk a little bit about the coral reefs in the Mike Scott story, Water Crisis, and what human damage is doing to coral reefs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
And that's frankly a recurring theme in a lot of my books, because Mike is a diver. I'm a diver. I've had a long career in the diving industry, as you mentioned, and so Mike Scott's a diver, and he's very aware of the ocean. You know, the coral reefs, people think they're all just pretty or whatever. They don't really think about what they do, but they literally protect our coastlines. They serve as habitat for juvenile fish to grow up on the reef before they go out into the ocean. So if we're overfishing, we're destroying the reefs. The reefs are, as water temperatures rise in the ocean, they're bleaching and dying. So if you've got coral reefs that are dying, then that leaves the coastlines unprotected, and it's a problem, shall we say? So yeah, I typically throw that into many of the Mike Scott stories. There's some aspect of environmental conservation with the oceans and that sort of thing.
And I know, in addition to Mike Scott getting himself into trouble, realistic trouble, and also trouble that you put him in explosions and coral reefs and the freshwater issue he's dealing with and Water Crisis, he also met another fictional character that was established by Sheila Redling, who we've had on the program and is a fantastic thriller writer, Danny Britton, one of her characters. Danny Britton and Mike Scott run into one another. Tell us a little bit about that and what happens when they do run into one another.
That was in the third key, and actually, it's I agree with you. Sheila's fantastic author, and I saw her post. And what was the name of the Redemption Key was the name of that book, and I saw her post something about it, and I picked it up. I actually read that one out of. That's the second book in the Danny Britton series. I actually read that one first, and then went back and read the Widow File was the first one, but I read it and was like, oh, this character's great. I need, and it's a little Florida island in the Florida Keys, and thinking she and Mike have to get together, not as a romantic thing, but just as a cross paths sort of thing. And yeah, that was a lot of fun to do. And I have to say, if you know the Danny Britton character, she has a wound on her leg, or she has a scar on her leg from a gunshot wound, and she makes up stories. She doesn't like to tell people how she got it. She makes up these outlandish stories. And so in my book, in the third key, I made up a story for Danny's bullet scar, and when Sheila read it, she immediately came back and said, "That's the best story for a scar ever." She just loved it. And so, in theory, we both know Sheila. No, I'm teasing, but Sheila's planning to do a crossover back. She's planning to include Mike Scott in one of her stories. Probably in another one of the Danny Britton stories. It's not the next one. I've read her next one. I got a sneak peek at the next story. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so there's no place for Mike in that one. But when Danny gets back down to Redemption Key, I think Mike will pop back in at some point.
That's great. So what is that like as an author when you have a character who's in a certain fictional world that you've created, and you're crossing that character over into another author's fictional world with the norms and the characters and the setting that another author has created? I mean, what is that like when you as the writer creatively are stepping inside of sort of this other world that another author has created?
It was fun, but it was a bit of a challenge. I had to go back and read. I didn't reread the whole book, but I read several scenes where the introductory scenes for Danny, just to, what does she look like again? What describe the setting of the place where she works, and I just had to refamiliarize myself because I wanted to get it right. I wanted it to be true to what Sheila had created, and you don't just you can't just mess somebody up. If you want it to be true to theirs and to their genre, to their setting, to their world, you have to take some care with it. It's not just I'm going to rewrite Danny in the way I want her to be. Mm-hmm. I wanted her to be the way Sheila had created, and keep true to that. But yeah, so it took a little extra effort, but I think it was worth it. It was a lot of fun to do. It was a lot of fun to have her in there.
That's great. I think it's a terrific thing that both of you did, and can't wait to see Mike Scott pop up in another one of her stories later on.
I'm looking forward to that too. Sheila will have fun with it, I'm sure.
Oh, she will. Absolutely. She absolutely will. So as we think about Mike Scott, Eric, and you've done now 8 novels with him, and Water Crisis being the most recent one. How has he changed or grown as a character from the first book you
Sure.
wrote and created him to where he is now?
Quite a bit, actually. You're supposed to have growth in your characters, but I think I've grown as a writer to allow Mike to grow as a character. Probably in the first couple 3 books, Mike was a bit more of a James Bondy. There were some gadgets. He kind of did some extreme things, but he was also a bit of a player. I didn't get into graphic sex or anything, but there was always a different woman in each book and that kind of thing. And then the 4th or 5th book, I said, Mike's got to settle down a little bit. I always portrayed him as a mid-40s photojournalist traveling the world. But actually, I had him meet a woman in the 3rd book, which is Guardian's Keep, set in Italy. Had him meet a Italian archaeologist. And Dr. Francesca DeMarco, kind of disappeared for a couple books. And in the 6th book, I bring her back. She kind of pops up. She had decided they had a connection. She wanted to reconnect with Mike, and she ends up tracking him down in Grand Cayman right as he's getting into the middle of one of his escapades. So she just throws in, and now actually, if having read Water Crisis, at the end of it, the next step is they're going to get married. I mean, we've progressed. She's shown up in several of the last books, and the next step. The next book, haven't started yet, but I'm still plotting it. Will probably open with them on their honeymoon, and I'm not going to try to stage a wedding, but they'll probably open with them on their honeymoon. And now, frankly, they're going to be kind of a husband and wife team out doing this kind of stuff. Her as the archaeologist, him as the adventurer, reporter, journalist, and. Yeah, we'll see where it goes from there.
She's going to have a big marital lasso to keep him in line.
Well, she's kind of a handful herself, though, so she'll probably be able to handle it.
Yes, they're perfect for each other. I mean, both without giving too much away of the story. Yes,
Right.
they're perfect for one another. So, I wanted to mention something a little more serious before we talk about your oral history documentary. I know in the midst of, since the last time we talked,
Right.
and you working on some of your documentary work and working for Inside Appalachia and working on the Mike Scott stories, you had a health episode.
I did.
A serious heart attack. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you
Absolutely.
are and
Yep.
how that's changed you?
Actually, a little over 3 years ago now, I had a heart attack and then ended up having quintuple bypass surgery. So I've got the chest scar to prove it, and they had to do 5 bypasses on my heart. And then that was a problem for 2 reasons. I mean, obviously the health issues to begin with, but also as a diver, you start questioning, can I go diving again? This is something I've invested nearly 30 years of my life into, and it's just going to be taken away from me. I knew from some of the work I'd done before that I could overcome it, but I was going to have to really apply myself. So literally 2 days home from the hospital, I was on the treadmill. Now, the way I always tell it is I did 2 5-minute walks and had to take a nap in between. I mean, even though I was in decent health, it was still, after all that surgery and all that work, you're flat on your back. Took me about 6 months. The surgery was at the end of January. My first dive was on my birthday or within a couple days of my birthday at the end of July. So it took me about 6 months to get back into the diving status, get cleared by the doctor, jump into it. So, what I decided to do during that, I literally wrote a newspaper column that I also do while I was still in the hospital, and started just talking about it because I thought it was important. Health issues like your heart's extremely important, obviously, but even for some people, you don't even realize it's going to be a problem until you wake up one day. The other twist to that is I used to be a CPR instructor. I used to be a CPR instructor trainer. So I used to teach other people to teach CPR classes. I have written the words, denial is a symptom of cardiac disease, hundreds of times in articles. But I was denying that I was having a problem. I was convinced it was acid reflux and indigestion and all that kind of stuff until I had a heart attack and then stress test and went straight to the hospital. So I actually decided from the columns and just some more in-depth stuff, I decided to write a book about that as well. I figured, I wanted to share my story, get it out there, and let other people know what they can do. It's really not about the heart disease as much as the road to recovery. What you can do, but you have to set your mind to it, have concrete goals, and move forward with it. And actually, the book sells pretty well.
Yeah, and it's called Heart Survivor, right?
Heart Survivor.
Yeah.
Actually, on the cover, you see that's actually a pillow they give you after heart surgery. So it's just a photograph of the pillow, but once you've had your sternum sawed in half, if you sneeze, if you cough, that hurts. Mm-hmm. So it's best to actually clutch that pillow to your chest, and actually on it, my surgeon actually also drew in all of my various heart bypasses. So if you look at the cover of that book, that's the work that I had done on my heart. Wow. But yeah, no, it was definitely a life-changing event, and I had written Return to Cayman before. Return to Cayman is the one of the book I mentioned where Frankie comes back into Mike's life. I had written that before my heart issues and all that, but I wonder if Mike settling down a little bit isn't sort of a byproduct of my own health issues, and okay, it's time to grow up. It's time to focus on himself a little bit more, and yeah.
Interesting.
It's definitely changed me for that. I'll definitely say that.
Well, you look great, and I'm glad you're doing well.
Thank you. I appreciate
I'm glad
that.
you're really doing well. So I want to ask you a little bit about your documentary work and your oral history work.
Sure.
You've been doing this for a long time.
I have.
Almost as long as you've been writing and contributing articles to Scuba Diving Magazine, and
Right.
also writing the Mike Scott series. What is it about, well, first of all, what is an oral history for our audience who may not be familiar with that? And what is it about oral histories that fascinates you so much?
My background's in journalism to begin with, so I've been doing interviews with people for 30 years now. I graduated from Marshall in '89, so I've been interviewing, talking to people like that for a long time. But well, first off, an oral history is really it's a life story. It's not the big events. It's not the stuff you're going to see in history books, but what it is. It's the stories. If you want to know what your grandparents, their recipes were, or your grandmother's recipe, or growing up in a coal camp, for example, or any of those kind of stories, it's the personal stories, the family stories. And so oral histories for me is a way to first off, it's a way for me to use the skills I have as a journalist and as an interviewer to capture those memories. The first big oral history project I did was the Veterans History Project, the West Virginia Voices of War, and I ended up interviewing 17 World War II veterans out of a total of 48 interviews for that project. Before I had finished the documentary and completed the book and had my big release, 4 of those veterans had actually passed away. Mm-hmm. So, and every one of the families came up to me and said, we really appreciate this because now we have Grandpa's voice. We have his story. And for me, that's what's important about oral histories is capturing those stories. So I mean, to a degree, it's a bit of a service that I want to provide to people. Mm-hmm. I actually wrote a short book, a how-to book on how to record oral histories too, because I can't obviously do them all. But so I'd love for people to take that and get an idea of how to record their own family stories. And all of my stuff goes into the archives at the West Virginia Archives and History Library at the Culture Center. But I want them to be available to researchers, to historians, to be able to find those basic human stories. First one that comes to mind, I remember June Jones was her name, whom ironically I originally met in cardiac rehab, but she came into to do an oral history with me. June Jones came in and was telling a story about growing up in a coal camp, and not everybody talks about coal camps, but she was talking about growing up in a coal camp and then talking about them all being vaccinated one day, and the nurse who was doing it, same needle for every kid in the one-room schoolhouse, that kind of stuff. This is stuff that we don't even think about. That's not our generation. That's a couple generations before you and I. And it's not even stuff we think about. So I like to capture those stories to have them for posterity.
Do you find when you're doing oral histories that there is some common themes that no matter who you're interviewing come up, or common issues that even if you're not really looking for that information, it somehow comes out in the course of your conversation?
With a lot of the oral histories I do, I don't have any time to prep for them, and like the stuff I've done through Festival, until just the last 2 years, we really hadn't done a theme. We just kind of took all comers, so I don't know who's coming in the door next. So I typically say, I'll look at you, not you directly, but I'll look at the interviewer or the interviewee and say, so you're about 70 years old, so that means you were born right after World War II, or if you're 90 years old, you were born during the Great Depression, that sort of thing. And I'll ask questions about what life was like for you during those periods. And so then I kind of draw them out and get them telling stories. So for what it's worth, a lot of my interviews tend to revolve around major historical events, but with the idea of how did it affect your life here in West Virginia or wherever you are, rather than what you read in the textbooks, what was it like for you in southern West Virginia? I remember another lady was down in Madison, in Boone County, but her father had wanted to go to war, but he couldn't because he had a job that was important here at home. I think he ran the power plant down in the area. But she was talking about even in Boone County, Madison, West Virginia, they had to darken all their lights and put headlight covers on their cars, so in case there was a bombing attack that they couldn't find the town. Think about that in Boone County in West Virginia, miles, hundreds of thousands of miles away from the war zones. Those kind of things come up, but again, I always try to get the local human aspect of the big ticket events.
So how many hours would you say of oral histories you have recorded?
I have recorded just over, including the Veterans Project and now the stuff I've done with Festival, I've recorded just over 150 interviews. Wow. Most of them are 45 minutes or so, although a few have certainly run longer, especially with the Veterans Project, because I was going to their homes. So a couple of them went 2.5 hours. We're probably looking at 100 to 125 hours of audio tape of just people telling stories. And I've edited through most of them in one way, shape, or form. The most recent one I think you saw was the Batter Up Baseball in Charleston. Mm-hmm. Last year we did oral histories specifically about people with memories of Watt-Powell Park in Charleston and the new ballpark in Charleston too, the West Virginia Power. And so I got 25 interviews with 28 different people. 3 of them had 2 people in them. And then put all that together in an hour-long documentary for public broadcasting.
That's great.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. And especially if you do 8 interviews in one day.
Right.
It's exhausting.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And you also are the associate producer of Inside Appalachia. So Inside Appalachia is what?
Inside Appalachia is a news magazine on West Virginia Public Broadcasting on the radio side. West Virginia Public Broadcasting is both TV and radio, but so I work on the radio side. Quite a lot of that comes from the oral histories. I was offered the position because of the oral history work I do. But it's a news magazine specifically aimed at the troubles or the situations inside Appalachia. Not, we're not talking about what's going on in New York or Atlanta or any of the big cities. It's how do those issues deal with, or how do those issues happen in West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, throughout there's 13 states that are at least partially involved in Appalachia. We try to hit kind of the central Appalachian states. And, we do everything from opioid problems to workplace safety and black lung to lighter stories. I've got a story that I'm finishing up on scuba diving in a lake in West Virginia. Mm-hmm. So we do a whole mix, run the whole gamut of stories, and it's a lot of fun.
So in our final moments with you today, Eric, if anybody wants to get in contact with you to find out more about the Mike Scott series, to find out more about the Heart Survivor book, or to find out more about your oral histories projects that you're working on or that you've already completed, where can they, first of all, get in contact with you, or how can they get in contact with you, and where can they get copies of your books?
Sure. The easiest way for all the information and direct contact is through my website, which is booksbyeric.com. Quick funny story. I've had that website since the first novel, Mike Scott novel, came out, which was Cayman Cowboys. So I said, I was thinking optimistically. So my website name is books, BOOKS, by Eric.com. I only had one book at the time, but I was confident there was going to be more than that. But yeah, booksbyeric.com. There's a contact form on the website, and I get those, and they come right to my phone, and I try to reply as quickly as I can to those. So that's the easiest way. As far as availability of books, they're in some bookstores. Several are available through Tamarack and through that system as well. But yeah, the easiest place is Amazon. All of my books are in softcover and in Kindle, or Kindle or wider distribution on ebooks as well. And so that's the easiest way. Personally, again, with my slightly environmental bent, I really love when people buy the ebooks, because then you don't have the printing and the paper and all that kind of stuff, and that will eventually get thrown away. I mean, you and I know my books are golden, and you would never want to throw them away. I'm not sure all of your viewers would quite feel that way.
Right.
When you're looking at a bookshelf full of books, something's got to go. And so I love when people buy the ebooks, and that's 90% of what I read is digital these days.
Very good. Eric Douglas has been our guest here today on Chapters, welcoming him back to the program after his last visit in 2016. He's the author of the latest Mike Scott series book, Water Crisis, which really focuses on a topic that really could become reality, and that is fresh water being a vital commodity worldwide, and his outstanding character, Mike Scott, gets himself tangled up in that storyline. And he's also the author of the book Heart Survivor, Recovering After Heart Surgery, and is also an oral historian who's working on and has completed a lot of outstanding oral history projects about West Virginia culture and West Virginia people. So, Eric, congratulations on all of that. I'm glad you're doing well health-wise.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And as you keep working, keep doing things, we'd like to have you back on the program. We promise it won't be 3 years before we have you back on.
I'll be happy to come back, even if it is 3 years from now.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it very much. We also want to take a moment to say thanks to the staff and management of the Inner Geek for providing our on-site support and assistance today. We encourage you to come down to the Inner Geek and pick up a copy of Eric's books, and remind you that many of the other author, editor, and publishers we featured on the program have their works for sale here at the Inner Geek. So come down to Pullman Square and get whatever reading taste you need satisfied right here at the Inner Geek. And if you want to stay in contact with what we have going on here on the Chapters program, we've made a variety of ways for you to do that and to be able to participate through a variety of social media platforms. The first is our email address, which is here at the bottom of the screen. We do ask that you please include your name and the town or community in which you're writing from so that we can keep track of that correspondence. We also have all of our author, editor, and publisher interviews archived on the Chapters page through the Armstrong One Wire page via YouTube, and that address is right here at the bottom of the screen. Once you type that into your search browser, just look for the Chapters tab, and all of our interviews are archived for you there as well. And we also have a Chapters Facebook page, and that address is here at the bottom of the screen. And what you'll find on our Facebook page is our more recent interviews archived for you there as well. So you can go on there, like those interviews, comment on them, share them to your Facebook page or other Facebook pages you have connected to your account. So if you like Facebook, you like YouTube, you like email, we've made it possible for you to reach out and keep in contact with the program. We know many of you have used those platforms to stay in touch. We appreciate that so much. So please keep those comments and feedback coming. And that will do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.